On January 23rd, a crowd gathered in Caracas. They chanted a two-word phrase to Juan Guaido, that being swear in, and alas, he did. What happened next was different international governments and bodies declaring him to be the legitimate ruler of Venezuela, rather than the corrupt Maduro. And many people thought that there would be revolution widespread. However, 5 months down the line, we've yet to see even the sparks of a revolution in Venezuela. So, of course, many now ask the question, will Venezuela see regime change in 2019? And the answer is, unfortunately, no, for three reasons. That first, Venezuela still has support from the military. Second, that Venezuela also still has support among a hardcore voting population. And third, that Venezuela is now getting international aid to make the situation less of a travesty. So let's see exactly why that no matter how legitimate Juan Guaido might be, no matter how popular he might be, Venezuela will still be under Maduro. Starting off from my first point, that Maduro still has the support of the military. See, of course, it is ridiculous to claim that a group of hungry, bankrupt protesters will be able to topple a very strong military of 500,000 with modern equipment. Simply put, the muscle in Venezuela is much larger. On one side, Juan Guaido has legitimacy, on the other, Maduro has guns. So, of course, with this, we see that the military actually supports Maduro still. As the New York Times reported on May 1st, that Venezuela has still not seen any sort of military uprising with the government. See, of course, this is the case because the military still supports him. But still, even if the military had wanted to uprise against the government, they can't because the government is still 2 steps ahead of the military. As The Economist reported on April 9th, the government does not trust the military even though they support the government. They lock up the military units' supplies and fuel overnight. See, of course, the government knows that the military is the key for Venezuela's protesters to get the best of them and start a regime change. And they simply don't trust them. So, if the government still can't trust the military, even if they're supportive of them, then could things actually get any worse? For the people? Well, actually, yes. Because Venezuela and the Maduro regime have another secret weapon. That being the colectivos. The colectivos, of course, are another paramilitary force, but they are a group of armed gang members fiercely loyal to Chavismo and, of course, the Maduro regime. But how powerful are these people exactly? As the Cato Institute noted on March 11th, the colectivos own about 10% of Venezuelan towns and cities. Simply put, that's a pretty fiercely controlling population size. That is a pretty fiercely loyal fanatic who still are able to support the Maduro regime. So, of course, simply put, the Venezuelan protesters for Juan Guaido don't have the muscle to match Venezuela. But, of course, that is not everything. And still, the Maduro regime still has some support, which brings me to my second point, that the Maduro regime overall still has a very fiercely loyal voting population in their country. See, of course, the situation now is bad, but that doesn't stop the Venezuelans from being fiercely loyal to the legacy that Maduro has from Hugo Chavez. Of course, Hugo Chavez was a pretty good leader, actually. He lifted a bunch of people out of poverty and made Venezuela a legitimate, really strong international state. But, of course, this was a big deal. And, after all, they still have support for Chavez. In fact, The Guardian notes that about 30% of the Venezuelan population still support the Maduro regime and will do so unconditionally. And even when things seemed at their worst, when on May 1st there were mass protests against the Maduro government, there was still a large amount of people who supported him. With the New York Times reporting on May 1st that protesters for the government in Venezuela marched on the streets on May 1st. See, of course, Venezuela still has very fiercely loyal protesters and fiercely loyal people who will unconditionally vote for them, making it seem that, overall, the motto that Chavismo still use stands, that being, even hungry, even sick, I'll stick with Chavez. But fortunately for those Chavismos, it seems like they won't even have to be hungry and sick for much longer. Which brings me to my second point, that finally, Maduro is accepting international aid from across the world, including the Red Cross. See, of course, Maduro, for a long time, didn't actually accept any aid into his country, and things seemed, well, tremendously terrible. See, one economist noted with the New York Times in an interview on February 8th that if the US does not send supplies amongst their tariffs, we're looking at starvation. But luckily, the US did have a plan B. They were going to end up sending, as the New York Times notes, on February 7th, hundreds of billions worth of dollars in aid for Venezuela. See, that's a pretty big number, and could actually use to help the Venezuelan population. But Maduro actually didn't let them in. There were even fierce border protests over the fact that many people in Venezuela were trying to get the trucks through to carry aid, but the military blocked them. But after all, things seemed awful, and in fact, many revolutions start with people being hungry. But now, Maduro has wisened up, and Al Jazeera noted on April 1st that Maduro has finally accepted international aid from the Red Cross and other organizations. See, Maduro stepped off his high horse and finally accepted that if he doesn't do something for the people, then they'll do what they did to Louis XIV in the French Revolution. Give him the guillotine. See, overall, Maduro has been smart, and Maduro has had a loyal following, which answers the question of, will Venezuela see regime change in 2019? And I answered no for the reasons that I just explained to you. Because, see, the United States and other international powers might have been trying to spark a revolution in Venezuela, but overall, revolutions are a very shaky thing. And sometimes, even if the conditions seem perfectly right, the sparks just won't start a fire. Thank you.